Welcome to another edition of the DLF Dynasty podcast. Fellas, it is episode 499, one away from big number 500, Ryan. I can't believe we have 500 episodes of the DLF Dynasty podcast almost in the books. You and I and Matt, of course, as well. We've been around for 200 plus of those, but you know, we've listened to them all before that. I just can't believe it's almost 500.
Yeah, crazy. As far as I know, I think this is true that the DLF Dynasty podcast was the first Dynasty specific podcast out there. And of course, since then, which is great news for all of us, there have been so many more, so much Dynasty content out there now, but it feels good to say we were the first ones.
Yeah, that feels great. Matt, you've been around for 200 plus episodes of the podcast. You know, the three of us have been together for quite a while now. We've been doing this for a long time. I just can't believe it's going to be 500.
Yeah, I think I look back, episode 208 was my first appearance as like kind of a guest spot. I think 233 was the first one I joined as a part of the full-time part of the staff. So it's been a while. We'll have to do another like kind of celebration at like 520 or something, because that'll be like 10 years if we one per week per 10 years is 520. I think.
Okay.
So we're almost 10 years. This show has been in existence, which is
holy cow,
pretty crazy when you think about Dynasty in general.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to celebrate episode 500. An extra episode will be released late this week or early in the weekend, maybe. We'll see how it all comes together. And then we'll have our regularly scheduled show number 501 early next week as well. So we got some fun stuff coming up. We're gonna get into that in the next couple of weeks. But first, we should finish up our consensus ranking shows. We've done running backs, we've done wide receivers. Now it's time to hit on the quarterbacks and the tight ends all in one episode, and we better get to it if we're going to get to it all. We're going to start under center with the quarterbacks, guys. And there were two quarterbacks that hit all three of our tier ones. It was Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Ryan, you and I had just those two signal callers in our first tier. Talk to me about Mahomes and Allen, why you think they kind of separate themselves from the rest of the group.
Well, it certainly could be a little bit of recency bias. And if that's the case, if that's the case, I won't even blame myself or you, Dan, or anybody else, because that just what an amazing game from those two this past weekend. But in reality, looking big picture here, you had that group, including Mahomes and Allen, along with Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray. That was kind of the top tier entering the season. And I think for much of the season, all four of those players disappointed, whether it was due to injury. Some of them seemed they weren't playing up to their upside, or at least their perceived upside. And I think for the majority of the season, we viewed all four of those players as losing a little bit of dynasty value, coming back to the pack with some of the other quarterbacks kind of closing on them. But the way we saw Allen and Mahomes not only finish the regular season, but certainly what we've seen the past couple of weeks, it's had an impact. And I do feel like there is a gap between those two and everyone else at this point.
Personally, I feel like there's a line there. It might be a gray line, not a dark Sharpied line. But there's a small tier break for me between Mahomes and Allen, and then that next group of about four quarterbacks that we're going to get to in a few minutes for all the reasons you mentioned. Also, it feels like now we're doing this consistently with these two players, Mahomes and Allen. Sure, there have been the ups and downs, maybe a little less consistent elite type fantasy performances compared to years past. But I think the NFL in general, quarterbacking in general this season, and certainly fantasy scoring from the quarterback position was relatively down. We saw the league switch to that cover two shell to try to keep the football in front of them all the time, prevent the big play. And that affected our game quite a bit. So we need the upside of these top two tiers of players. Like I said, I think there's a real thin line between these two guys and the next group. Matt, on the other hand, you decided that Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray deserve to be in this tier. Talk to us about why you think those two should be involved there.
Yeah, I just think the line is, you guys alluded to it. The line is so small. I mean, if you want to draw a line between Mahomes and Allen and the rest of the tier 2 guys, as we've ended up with a consensus, I understand that. But for me, Lamar Jackson, like once the reason why I think he's actually my quarterback 1 overall in Dynasty right now, and the reason for that is that when everything comes together, when the rushing is almost always there. But when the passing numbers catch up to the rushing numbers, then you have something truly special. At 2019 season, he averaged over 28 points per game. That's the highest from a quarterback in the last decade. So I just don't think anybody else really has his upside when everything's firing for Lamar Jackson. And he had, nagging injuries last season. He was sick a lot. So I'm not trying to make excuses for him. I just think when the stars align, he represents the most productive quarterback in fantasy football. And then with Kyler Murray, I think it's Kyler Murray maybe is the one that you could maybe push down. He didn't have a stellar season. He got banged up again. And with him, I think that the injuries really do stack up, and you can tell a difference between when he's playing fully healthy and not. But just like Jackson, he can do more than the other two. Maybe it's a toss up with Allen. Allen, I know runs a lot too. But that rushing upside that he presents too is enough for him to put me to put him in that top tier with Mahomes and Allen. Mahomes had that nice run in the playoff game, but for the most part, he doesn't run a lot. You like him because of the consistency, because of the lead production, because of the offense around him. So I don't know. I understand drawing a line, but for me, they're kind of all in the same bucket at this point, and I'll take whichever one's the cheapest.
So, right now, Lamar Jackson is certainly the cheapest, Matt. Yeah. And if that's how you feel about him, that he's your QB1, I get everything you said, and certainly the upside is there when he's healthy. But looking at our latest Superflex ADP, he's down to quarterback 7.
I saw that.
I'm behind Burrow, behind Herbert, behind Dak even. So I know when I see those gaps in my own rankings, if I've got a guy 1 and everybody else thinks 7, I'm trying to buy in every single league. And obviously I'm sure you are as well. The other thing that I was looking at as we got ready for this show was a pretty cool app on DLF called the Player Scoring History app. And it breaks down what percentage of the players' games that they score as a top 5 option at their position or a top 12 option at their position. And it goes deeper than that as well. And this is where Josh Allen really stood out. 48% of his games the past 2 seasons. So obviously nearly half of his games, he's been a top 5 quarterback. That's the highest among any of the players we'll talk about today. And when you break that down to or take it a little further down to the QB1, so we're talking top 12, that's where Patrick Mahomes stands out. He has the highest QB1 score 69% of the time. The past 2 seasons, he's a QB1.
So Mahomes and Allen, because of those numbers, they end up being the consensus tier 1 quarterback ones. Let's jump into quarterback 2. And Ryan and I both had Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray in this tier to go along with a couple more guys, Matt, that you put all by themselves. So I guess technically the 3 of us all had the same 6 quarterbacks listed in our top 6. Just me and Ryan had 2 guys in tier 1. Matt, you had 2 guys in tier 2. Those 2 guys were Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow, Matt.
Yeah, Burrow has been playing out of his mind the last month or so, including the playoffs, doing just things that he really wasn't doing most of the season. He had a bunch of games. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but under 200 yards, one or no passing touchdowns when they were more focused on the run game. But what he's done lately has really vaulted him up a tier or 2, honestly, in my personal rankings. And then Herbert, I think, if we had to put Justin Herbert in the top tier, I wouldn't really argue with anybody that wants to do that. The things that he was doing down towards down the stretch at the end of the season was also pretty crazy for somebody who we thought was just going to be kind of a mechanical quarterback, and like the Mariota style, both coming out of Oregon. And I think we found out that was probably just the system, at least for Herbert. And he really takes off when the coaches kind of let him do his thing. Like when they're down big and he just is out there freestyling, that's when Herbert really shines. So I hope Staley and the rest of the coaching staff sees that and doesn't try to, hold him back, so to speak, from what he can do with his talents. So both of those guys, I wouldn't argue with anybody that put in tier 2. And for me, those two are clearly ahead of the quarterbacks that I have in tier 3.
Yeah, Ryan and I both have Herbert and Burrow along with Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray. I want to bring this conversation back to Kyler Murray. Matt, you mentioned him as a guy you felt really comfortable putting him in tier 1. I actually had a little bit of trouble putting Murray in tier 2 because of the tail off in his performance each of his first 3 years in the league. It seems like if you want to make the playoffs in your fantasy league, you want Kyler Murray as your quarterback. But if you want to win a championship, it's going to be difficult to do because he gets banged around a little bit. He runs early in the season. Once he has some of those nicks and scrapes and maybe even serious injuries, his fantasy output certainly tails off. And you can probably point to DeAndre Hopkins, his injury this year, but even in years past, towards the end of the season, he seems like he wants to run to pass way more than he wants to run to make a big play with his legs. So he's not creating that kind of floor, that high floor that we always like out of these running quarterbacks. I kind of feel like I'm pretty confident saying he's very much closer to the tier 3 guys than he is to the top of tier 2 for me. So I know you guys, and Ryan, you can speak on this as well. You guys probably want feel pretty comfortable with Murray being in here. And I'm a little bit queasy. I'm not sure that he's a guy, especially in these super flex leagues, that I want to trust with a dynasty championship contender moving forward because he does get banged up so much and so consistently.
Yeah, I get the concern, and I've got that same concern. I've moved him down my rankings, but I do feel comfortable with him here in this tier 2 with Jackson, Herbert, and Burrow. The numbers overall, big picture, are still pretty impressive for Murray. As I said, I was using the player scoring history app. 43% of the time, he's giving you a top 5 game. That's I believe that's third highest among all the players we'll talk about, behind Allen and a couple of others. And then 63% of the time, a top 12 game. So I still like the ceiling. He started the season this past year with back-to-back QB1 games, weeks 1 and 2, and we were I think all 3 of us were probably ready to move him up to the QB1 overall rank, and plenty of other people were as well. And then things slowed down. We saw that inconsistency. Dan, as you mentioned, he kind of quit running for some reason. I don't get that, but I think we have to factor it into our valuation of him. If that running is not there, if we can't count on 40 or 50 yards like we can from Allen and from Lamar, then it's hard to value him in that same group.
We all remember in the middle of the season that Murray missed those couple games. He had the injury problems, and that's really when things started going downhill for him, and he stopped looking to run. He was still scrambling. He was still getting outside the pocket, but it seemed like his eyes were farther downfield, and he wasn't looking to make those electrifying big plays until really late in the season, when it seemed like the team's fortunes in the playoffs or their playoff seeding really depended on him. He had to put the team on his back. The other thing that concerns me about Murray, and I don't know if you guys do this, but I put a lot of stock into body language when I watch a player play. And that playoff game, he did not look like a guy that wanted to be on the field. Once they got down by a couple of scores, he didn't seem like he was really leading that team. I remember back to when he was drafted and he decided to play football over baseball. There was kind of a couple weeks there where people were wondering what was going to happen. And he did an interview. I think it was on Dan Patrick. And they asked him a question about baseball, and he just like froze. Like he didn't know what to say. And the whole interview went on that way. And I thought to myself, wow, that's an NFL quarterback. He doesn't seem like he has a whole lot of confidence, which is very weird because when you get him on the field, he has all kinds of confidence. He exudes it. But then they got down in that football game, and he looked like he wanted to curl into a ball, and he wanted to give up.
Yeah.
Now, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I didn't like what I saw out of Kyler.
I don't know if you caught this, Dan or Matt, but on that Monday night game, the playoff game, they had the Manning cast.
Yep.
And that's the, when that's an option, that's the one I watch. So
Me too.
Of course, Eli and Peyton bringing on guest, and in that, I believe it was the fourth quarter, they had Russell Wilson on, and Arizona's down 10 points or a couple touchdowns, whatever it was. And it's getting late, and it certainly was not looking good for them. And one of the Mannings asked Russell Wilson, "What do you do in this situation?" And the screen was on the action on the field, and Russell Wilson said, "If I'm Kyler Murray, I'm walking up and down the sidelines. I'm pacing the sidelines. I'm patting every player on the butt, on the back, and saying, 'This is it. We're in good shape. We got this.'" And the camera pans to Kyler Murray, and he's sitting on the bench, slouched, almost pouting. And it was almost funny, honestly, of the timing that Russell Wilson is saying, "This is what I would do. This is what Kyler Murray is really doing." And it kind of goes to what you were saying there.
It's almost reminiscent of seeing Cam dejected on the sidelines with a towel over his head and just like, well, there's nothing I can do, that kind of thing. So I definitely get that. I do think, I hesitate to say that Hopkins was the reason why the sole reason why the Cardinals kind of tanked down the stretch of the season. But when you do look at the rest of the receivers, I mean, they're nothing really to write home about. I like Christian Kirk is fine. I really love Rondale Moore. I don't think they really used him to the full extent of his capabilities. Zach Ertz is, fine. But outside of that, I mean, there's no superstar weapon for that team. Hopefully that changes for this offense.
We'll see how it plays out over this offseason. They got to get Hopkins back in that receiving core, and things will look good. I'm confident of that in September. Once again, I really question how they're going to look in December and January moving forward with Kyler under center, though. I've moved him down my rankings, and as I said, we have this tier of 4: Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and Kyler Murray. I would not trade one of those top 3 guys in that tier for Kyler Murray in a small piece. So I almost put him in tier 3, which is where we're headed right now. There's a couple guys that all 3 of us listed here. It's Dak Prescott and it's Jalen Hurts, Matt. So Prescott, another guy that has come under fire of dynasty managers. Jalen Hurts has as well. These guys have the ultimate weekly upside. They can put up quarterback 1 performances week in and week out for a stretch of the season, but there's been inconsistency with them as well. So talk to me about why you only listed these 2 players in tier 3.
It was almost only one. In fact, it was almost only Hurts. I could see Prescott being in the tier 2. I feel like he is somebody else who's also been playing with, some nagging injuries the entire season. He had that. Yeah, first of all, he's coming back from the foot injury. Then he had a knee. And then like in training camp, I think he had some kind of arm or elbow question, right? Publicized on Hard Knocks. So I'm not convinced he was fully healthy the entire season. There were stretches where that Cowboys offense looked like what we thought they were going to be the entire season. A great quarterback, 3 of the best receiver, one of the best receiver cores in the league, all-stars at running back, great offensive line, all that stuff, a defense that looked ready to go. And it just never really came together, which is, often the case with teams like this where we think there's just no holes. So I think he could easily get back into tier 2 with a good season. And then Hurts, I think the only really question mark with him is, are they going to commit to him long-term? And that's the question we've had about him since the offseason. And it seems like once Sirianni realized that what Hurts can do and what he's good at and what he's not, they kind of tailored the offense around him, and he started to play better, both from a real life perspective and a dynasty perspective, maybe a little bit less because he wasn't kind of freelancing as much. But I don't know. I just don't feel like they're going to be able to find a better option at quarterback. And even if they do, then I feel like there's a team out there that's going to want to have Jalen Hurts and build an offense around him. So I'm not really concerned with that piece of the puzzle. It's just, I'd like to see a little bit more development from him as a passer. And I think we've started to see that down the stretch of the season. So I'm comfortable with him here. I understand if you're worried about him not having a job next season, but I'm not worried about that.
I was pretty critical of Jalen Hurts in the middle of the season. In fact, there was a time, I think, on this show where I said he's not going to be the quarterback of the Eagles next season. And then what you just said there, Matt, happened. And they started to tailor that offense to his strengths. The thing that happened along with that, though, and I think you might have touched on it there, is his fantasy appeal went down when those things happened. He started taking care of the ball a little bit more, and he didn't unlock that elite top of the line quarterback 1 overall upside that he did earlier in the season and late last season. So I think there's a little bit of give and take. I've backed off that stance a little bit, and it seems like the Eagles have maybe backed him as their starting quarterback moving forward. They seem to want to, through the press, mention from time to time now that they're going to build around him, and that's a good thing. I have Jalen Hurts on a couple of teams. I'm cautiously optimistic that he takes another step forward. So Prescott and Hurts, Ryan, both make up this tier for all three of us. You added a handful of young quarterbacks along with those two in Trey Lance, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Fields, and then also threw in the perennial quarterback one, it feels like, Russell Wilson. He has all the upside and always ends as a low-end quarterback 1, even with a failure towards the end of the season.
Yeah. Wilson just snuck into this tier. Actually considered kind of putting him in his own tier. We'll get deeper here, and maybe you'll see why I didn't do that. But as far as the 3 rookie quarterbacks, or I guess the guys coming off their rookie year, Trey Lance, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, I mean, we would all agree that we're disappointed, and basically everybody's disappointed with their rookie season. I mean, they were even being drafted as QB1s in redraft leagues. We were so excited about their individual upside, and none of them hit that for different reasons. But I still trust in all 3 and believe in all 3 as high upside options. I have moved them down. I mean, at one point I had them above Jalen Hurts, and I think maybe even above Dak Prescott at one point. So had to adjust a little bit, but I still think they fit in this tier. Matt talked about the questions surrounding Hurts. I agree with him that I don't have as many questions, or certainly not those same questions anymore. But I look at all those young quarterbacks in kind of the same way, that if they can answer that call and answer those questions, they're moving up to tier 2 or potentially even higher.
Yeah, all those guys have tier 1 upside, really, it feels like, and maybe they didn't show that quite as much this past season. I had Trey Lance in this tier as well. He's the only rookie I was willing, or former rookie now, I guess, I was willing to put into tier 3 with Dak and Jalen Hurts. I still think that he is oozing with upside, and he's shown that in spurts. Of course, we haven't seen it for long stretches. It doesn't seem like Shanahan wants to unlock that entire offense when Lance is under center, whether that is because of the inaccuracies he's shown from time to time, or maybe he's just too young. Maybe it's that he has these specific plays that he's willing to mix him in on, and that's the only thing that he really wants Trey Lance to do when Garoppolo goes to the sideline. So when he's gotten his opportunities, he's shown enough to me. And I know there's a lot of guys out there that are very, very much questioning whether Lance has that kind of upside. I can't not see it at this point. When I see him play that start that he had late in the season, I can't believe I heard negativity coming out of that. I really felt like that was an elite type showing for Trey Lance, and I can't wait for next year. I really hope the 49ers don't go to the Super Bowl or something, and then they think they got to keep Jimmy around. So we end up with just 3 in tier 3, guys. It's Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, and Trey Lance. The guys that you mentioned there, Ryan, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and Russell Wilson, they all ended up in tier 4, as me and Matt both had each of them here. Now, you did something a little bit different than us, and I can see where you're going with this. You only listed 1 player in tier 4 for good reason.
Yeah, it's Deshaun Watson. So we almost don't even need to have a conversation about the on-field Deshaun Watson, because we know the upside. And if and when he gets back on the field, he vaults up at least 1 tier, maybe 2, maybe even 3. We also I don't think we need to have a conversation about the off-field, because it's still such an unknown. There's a chance he never plays in the league again. There's a chance he starts week 1 of this coming season. We just don't know. It is a wait and see. I think the real conversation for us is how do you mix those two things and come up with a dynasty value? So that's what I tried to do. I put him in his own tier. I don't think it's fair really to try to rank him against some of the young quarterbacks like Lance or Fields. Look at some of the veterans that we'll get to in a moment. Guys like Rodgers and Stafford, I have lower than him. And I guess ultimately what I decided is, even if he misses all of 22, if he's suspended for all of 2022 or even in jail, honestly, I still want him over the rest of these guys, knowing or at least presuming he'll be back in 2023.
For me, I had Deshaun Watson in this tier with those young quarterbacks, these rookie quarterbacks, with Matthew Stafford, with Russell Wilson, with Aaron Rodgers. And the reason for me just came down to, I can see myself on a team with Deshaun Watson, moving him straight up for one of those young guys. If my roster construction looks more like I'd rather have somebody that's for sure on the field. I'm building towards the future and I can't take the risk with Deshaun Watson. I could also see myself trying to jump into Russell Wilson and grab a copy of him instead if I'm a contender and I feel like I can win a league this year and I'm not sure Deshaun Watson's going to be on the field for my team. So I had Watson in here as well. Matt, you bumped him down one more tier from tier 4 to tier 5. Talk to me about what you were thinking with Watson.
Yeah, I just thought about it, and if again, we can tier these things a million different ways. But if we're talking about trades, and I'm trying to put myself in a situation, I think I can understand putting him here in terms of this is where kind of the upside ends after that tier 3. Like after that, we're looking at players that we're okay as having probably as our quarterback 2, probably aren't very excited about having them as our quarterback 1. And Watson, we certainly would be, but I just can't see trading him for a locked in guy that I know I can count on as my quarterback 1. And that's why I moved him down a tier. But, I definitely understand the upside and the draw for it. And I would not give anybody a hard time for putting him here. I just wouldn't trade. And my tier 4 is Wilson, Lance, Fields, Lawrence, Rodgers, and Stafford. And there's just no way, unless I see myself in like a 2 or 3 year rebuild project where I could consider trading any of those guys for Watson without a significant amount coming back.
So tier 4 ends up with no consensus guys. We did end up with Watson, Lawrence, Fields, Wilson, Stafford, and Rodgers. Matt and I pretty much had the same tier, except I had Deshaun Watson and he had Trey Lance in this one. I was one higher on him. So we end up with a tier of 6 players, even though we didn't have any consensus guys. Tier 5, we did find a handful of consensus guys. It was Tua Tagovailoa, Ryan Tannehill, Tom Brady, and Kirk Cousins. Ryan, the news on Tom Brady. Maybe he's coming back. Maybe he's not. He's going to take some time to think about it. Not necessarily inside this tiers, but what is your general feel of Tom Brady? And if you're a dynasty manager with him on your roster, you pretty much just got to wait it out, right?
Actually, in some ways, it's kind of similar to the Deshaun Watson conversation.
It's weird, yeah,
because there is some obvious unknown, certainly not the same kind of unknown, but if Brady's on the field, this is where I value him. I've got him ranked over Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr and several others, kind of those lower end QB2 types. And even if he were to announce he's coming back, but 2022 will be his last season, this is probably still where I would have him ranked, or perhaps even move him up. I've got Ryan Tannehill above him right now. And I could even see him moving up a couple spots just with that certainty of knowing he's got one more year. But the uncertainty right now, and obviously if he retires, he's gone from this list. That's where I ended up with him ranked.
You and I also had Mac Jones and Zach Wilson inside this tier. I felt a little bit squeamish about where to put these other in quotation marks, these other rookie quarterbacks. Mac Jones's rookie season was much better than Zach Wilson's. I personally still see the upside with Zach Wilson as well. It really feels like this is a tier of the starting NFL quarterbacks that I don't really mind putting in my starting lineup for one reason or another. Tua certainly fits that. Kirk Cousins fits that. And then these two young guys, I want them on my roster still.
Mm-hmm.
If I have to start them in a super flex, I'm willing to do that. The guys below this, I'm looking for other options.
Yeah, honestly, after this is tier 5 we're in, and after we get past this tier, we'll get into some of the names, but even in a super flex league, I don't have much interest beyond this. I'm glad we're stacked at the top, and we've got 10 quarterbacks that are 25 years old and younger that look like superstars. I'm glad, because the depth is not there. Once you get past probably 20 or so, it's pretty ugly.
I actually included a couple other guys because of those reasons that I mentioned. If I'm in a super flex league and I got to start a QB2, who are the guys that I'm okay sliding into that slot in my lineup? I threw Derek Carr in there because I don't mind if he's my QB2. Hopefully he's your quarterback 3, obviously. I also put Carson Wentz in there, and I know he was up and down, a little more down, especially late in the season. But I still have faith that former MVP candidate is in there somewhere, and he'll get unlocked down the road in Indianapolis. Matt, you had those 4 consensus guys: Tua, Tannehill, Tom Brady, Kirk Cousins, and then obviously Deshaun Watson was in there. You were the only one to consider Baker Mayfield right here.
Yeah, I just think he had a down year. If we go back to 2020, I think his season was much better, more consistent. Half of the season he had Donovan Peoples-Jones as his only wide receiver. When Odell was out or really not paying attention most of the season in Cleveland, and then Jarvis Landry injury, and then he was thrown to like 3 different tight ends. This is a run-based attack, and that's what they're going to continue to be under the current regime. But I think there's a better quarterback in there than we saw in 2021. I think this is a borderline playoff team. They had that weird game where if they won, they would have been first in the division. If they lost, they were out of the playoffs and ended up losing. So I don't know. I have a little bit more faith in him, and I'm excited about his upside a little bit more than the players in my next tier, which includes guys you already mentioned like Carr and Wentz.
Yeah. So we end up with 6 names in tier 5. We should get through tier 6 real quick before we jump over to the tight ends, guys. We had a couple consensus quarterbacks here: Jimmy Garoppolo and Matt Ryan. We also ended up with Baker Mayfield. Ryan and I both had him in this tier. And then Derek Carr and Carson Wentz, you guys had him as well. Among these guys, we're about 25 deep among the quarterbacks. So the quarterback 2s are covered now. Among these guys, at the bottom of those quarterback 2s, Ryan, is there anything really noteworthy?
I stuck Jordan Love in this tier. Just thinking about the potential future. When we have seen him, it hasn't been great, but if Aaron Rodgers does leave or does move on from Green Bay, if it's Jordan Love, he's going to see a value bump, no matter what we've seen from these small samples of playing time he's had over the past season. He's going to have a value bump, and he would be right in this tier with Jared Goff and Jameis Winston. When I look at these guys, Garoppolo included, and Carson Wentz included as well, I don't think we can say with 100% certainty they're going to be 2022 starters. Actually, Derek Carr is probably the only one we can. Maybe that means I should move him up out of this tier, but that's definitely not a huge vote of confidence for Jordan Love, but it's more of he's got the upside where some of these guys are on the downswing.
Who jumps out for you, Matt?
He's in the next tier for me, but I would say Jameis Winston. I think he had a fine season before he went out. Only 3 interceptions in the 7.5 games he played, which is definitely not the Jameis Winston that we had expected. So if he comes back from that injury, I think he has a chance to move up a couple of tiers here and be back in our good graces. A couple of explosion games, a 5-touchdown game in week 1, obviously against our Packers, Dan, a 4-touchdown game in week 5, and then only 1 implosion game week 2 against the Panthers where he had no touchdowns and 2 interceptions. So I still have faith in Jameis coming back and being a starting quarterback.
I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there in New Orleans. Of course, all the questions around Sean Payton and if he'll be back now, that's kind of an odd question to be asking, but apparently people are asking it. And then the quarterbacks situation, they probably will try to address it. Whether they accomplish that goal or not, we'll see. Let's quickly recap these quarterback tiers. Tier 1, just 2 names, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Then Tier 2 went Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and Kyler Murray. In Tier 3, we had 3 quarterbacks, Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, and Trey Lance. Then in Tier 4, a handful of guys, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Rodgers. In Tier 5, it was Tua Tagovailoa, Ryan Tannehill, Tom Brady, Kirk Cousins, Mac Jones, and Zach Wilson. And then Tier 6, Jimmy Garoppolo, Matt Ryan, Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, and Carson Wentz. We didn't mention those guys, Daniel Jones, Jameis Winston, Davis Mills, Jared Goff, Taysom Hill, Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Darnold. We all had them listed, but we had them in Tier 7 and Tier 8. Before we get to the tight end tiers, we should talk about our friends over at Monkey Knife Fight. Daily fantasy sports for the rest of us. Even if you played DFS in the past, your experience with Monkey Knife Fight will feel completely different. No more competing against professional players or working through time-consuming salary caps. With Monkey Knife Fight, you choose from unique, easy-to-play games, including the popular More or Less contests, where you can bet on if your favorite NFL player will have more or less yards than predicted. I sure hope you had all the overs in that Chiefs football game this past weekend. Sign up for a new account with Monkey Knife Fight with a first-time deposit and receive a full year of DLF premium for free. In addition, Monkey Knife Fight will match the deposit total up to $100 with the promo code DLF. That's it. That's all you have to do. Your DLF subscription will be set up within 36 hours, and you'll have access to everything we have to offer at Dynasty League Football. So go log on to dynastyleaguefootball.com, click the image for Monkey Knife Fight, and follow the instructions to get started today. Ryan, you and I both did pretty good on that Chiefs game the other night. Took a lot of overs.
You did okay on that one?
Did pretty good in those prop games. Let's get into these tight ends. Tier 1's pretty easy, guys. It was a clean sweep, one name, just Kyle Pitts, Matt. Did you consider anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, just because of my perceived personal bias for Kyle Pitts, I consider putting the next 2 guys. Listen, I did trade away 3 shares down the stretch of Kyle Pitts to try to help myself get a title and for that final run. So I am not incapable of trading him off of my teams. But I did consider putting the next 2 guys, Kittle and Andrews, up there with them. You know, I think you could throw all 3 of these guys in a basket and pick the one you like. If you think you want some more consistent production, you probably take Andrews or Kittle. If you want the upside, you probably take Pitts. Kittle, for me, you know, he has a little bit of injury concern, but these 3 guys for me are clearly the top. And if you want to throw them all in the same tier, that's fine with me. But for Pitts, you know, based on the age, based on what he did his rookie season, yes, it was impressive. It wasn't disappointing to me, despite the only 1 touchdown, more yardage than any tight end since Mike Ditka 60 years ago. On and on. I can talk about him for days, but I'll leave it there. He's the tight end 1 with a bullet, and I think he's a fringe first-round pick in Dynasty startups.
Ryan, it feels like through ADP, the Dynasty community has spoken and has put Kyle Pitts in a tier by himself. He at 9 in our ADP with an ADP of 11.33. Then you have to go all the way down to 27 for Mark Andrews and 36 for George Kittle. We all seem to value Pitts at a higher level. It's going to be hard to get a 1-for-1 trade at this point. You're going to have to put something pretty sweet on top to move up from one of these tier 2 guys to Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, for sure. And I talked about the player scoring history app I was using. Another pretty cool tool on DLF is our ADP history app. And if you check that out, you will see that Travis Kelce and George Kittle and Mark Andrews and Darren Waller and Hockenson and basically all these other players we'll talk about have zero career have never finished in the first round of one of our monthly ADP mocks. And Kyle Pitts has done that, I believe, 3 times now. So 3 times he's been a first rounder, 3 months straight. And Travis Kelce has never done that. So that's kind of crazy to think about. Certainly the community is 100% believing the hype. And I think he's not the 101, certainly overall in Dynasty. I don't think some people would put him there. But I think he might be the hardest player to acquire in Dynasty.
For me, he's the 104 right now in a one quarterback league. I think I want both of the receivers that we talked about, Jefferson and Chase, and maybe a Jonathan Taylor if I'm going to build around running backs from there. But after that, it's Kyle Pitts over everybody else for me.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm trading Pitts, moving down to one of these other tight ends and getting that sweetener on top, because it feels like it's a first round rookie pick or close to that. To move down to one of these guys, considering that ADP.
Oh, I think you can get way more than that.
Wow.
Like, are you saying like Andrews and a first for Pitts?
Yeah.
Oh, I think
if you can get more than that, I'm doing that. I considered putting Mark Andrews in the same tier, coming off the season that he just had, where he wasn't the tight end one or whatever. He was the tight end one. He was the guy. He was the number one guy in that offense. His shadow just lurked all over Hollywood Brown in the second half of the season, and it didn't matter who's playing quarterback for him. That is the kind of player that we want Kyle Pitts to become, right? With a little bit more of downfield, down the seam, down the sideline type upside, maybe than Andrews offers. Andrews offers 5, 7, 9 catches a game every single game, and he's getting at least one red zone look a game, and he's coming through on those. I love Pitts too, but if Pitts becomes what Mark Andrews did this season, we will be happy with that. And Andrews has already done it.
Yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't make that type of trade. I'm just saying that the Pitts,
you should aim higher than what I'm talking about.
The Pitts train is out of control, and you can get more than Andrews in a first.
I saw that train going by, and it was Matt's face in the front, just chug it down the road.
I was gonna say you need to make the offer in some league, so I'd probably pay that, Dan.
So Kyle Pitts makes up tier 1. Tier 2, just 2 names for each one of us: Mark Andrews and George Kittle. Kind of surprising. I thought maybe at least one of us would have Travis Kelce in there, but 32 years old, going to be 33. We saw cracks in the armor, chinks in the armor. It really wasn't the same Travis Kelce, although he was dominant and he had some huge games. He also disappeared a couple times, and I think we all see what's coming at this point. So we all put him down in tier 3. How close was he to tier 2 for you, Ryan?
He was close. I mean, the numbers, you said it, the numbers are dominant. I've been, as I said, using this app to kind of get some perspective of what these guys have really done over the past 2 seasons. Just for reference, the highest tight end 1 percentage of any of the players we'll talk about today, I said the second highest is Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews has been a tight end 1, a top 12 tight end, 65% of his games over the past 2 seasons. Travis Kelce has been a top 5 tight end 71% of the time. So, I mean, just lapping the field in production, not only over the past 2 years, but over the past 5 years. Mark Andrews broke Kelce's string of finishing as the tight end 1 in 4 straight years. And it's really only that age, only that number 32 that pushes him out of the second tier for me.
Matt, for you only put Travis Kelce's name in tier 3. You thought there was a line between him and anybody else. It's clearly because of that elite production for so long. Obviously, you're still expecting him to put up big numbers for the next year or 2.
Yeah, I mean, I would have him closer to tier 2 than I would to tier 4, to be honest with you, or closer to these next guys that I have in tier 4 with Hockenson and Waller. Hockenson, we expected him to be the guy, and he was at times this season, but I don't know. I feel like I expected more, and then Waller opened the season with that huge 19 target game, and then just kind of he was fine. He was a tight end. He was a mid tight end 1 when he was on the field before he got hurt. So maybe that huge production comes back. Maybe the offense continues to run through him, but I have to think that the Raiders are going to bring in some wide receiver talent. Finally, I know they've tried with Ruggs and with Brian Edwards, who's a bust, and now they have Renfro kind of heating up. And I really do think that Renfrow and Waller occupy similar areas of the field, and Renfrow produced when Waller was on the field, and Waller had games where he didn't. So I think the production has dropped a little bit. I'm not sure if it comes back. So those guys are nowhere near Kelce for me. So that's why Kelce is still in the same tier, or in his own tier.
Yeah, Ryan and I, we both put Darren Waller and TJ Hockenson in this tier. And I think the only reason I did it, Ryan, you can speak on this as well, is because if I'm ready to move on from Kelce, those are the only two guys below there that I'm considering in a straight up deal. If that's the best I can do. Other than that, Kelce is clearly in a league of his own among these tier 3 tight ends.
Yeah, I think so. And I would agree with your statement there. Actually, I almost put Hockenson in the tier below. Again, kind of falling into that trap we talked about last week of trying to group the older players together. Kelce and Waller being a little bit older, certainly older than Hockenson, but ultimately the value is kind of what won out there. And I do believe they have similar value, at least worthy of being in the same tier.
So just one guy in tier 1, Kyle Pitts, 2 guys in tier 2, Mark Andrews and George Kittle, and then 3 guys in tier 3, Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, and TJ Hockenson. Can we keep it going and get 4 guys in tier 4? Probably not. Dallas Goedart is the only guy that is a consensus tier 4 guy. Matt, you had him there with TJ Hockenson and Darren Waller.
Yeah, I think he's the line for me, honestly. If I'm a competing team, Dallas Goedart is the line of the tight end that I'd really like to have on my team. And we saw what happened down the stretch. Him and Hurts really seemed to form a connection, especially once Hurts finally took off. We thought that was going to happen at the beginning of the season, before the season, and didn't. Hurts kind of stole some of his production early on. And once he was gone, he kind of it wasn't right away. It wasn't like Ertz was gone and immediately Goedart became a super stud. That didn't happen until later in the season once the offense changed a little bit, like we talked with Hurts. But he's the next guy for me. He's the one who could be in tier 3 next season pretty easily. If things go right for him. He's the number 2 target in that offense. I don't really know what to say about him. We've been waiting forever, it seems like, for Goedart to get his own position, and he be the only game in town at his position, and he finally did that. So I think the sky's the limit for him.
Ryan, you and I both put Freiermuth with Dallas Goedart in this tier. Talk to me about Pat Freiermuth and his upside, considering everything that's going on in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I actually don't know if upside's the word I think of when I think of Freiermuth, but just the consistency is what I have seen. And the same reasons that we're kind of excited about Deontay Johnson, a player that has played so well, and now, fingers crossed, he's going to get a quarterback upgrade. Make me feel good about Freiermuth as well.
There was so much of his production that came from those touchdowns in the middle of the season. Between weeks 8 and 12, he scored 5 touchdowns in 5 games. Then in week 14, he scored again. He had the concussion late in the season, but for a stretch of the season of about 6 weeks, guys, he was a top 3 scoring fantasy football tight end. Top 4 if you're in half PPR or standard leagues, but or top 3 in standard, top 4 if you're in PPR leagues. Because he wasn't getting peppered with targets. He was getting regular targets in the red zone. We always talk about how a tight end can suddenly jump into the top 12 for the week because he caught a touchdown. Seems like Freiermuth is getting those opportunities every single week, and he's cashing in on them. I don't know if that's going to continue, but it really feels like he gets mismatches every single week down there because of all those other options that are on the field. You can't go out there and look at Chase Claypool and say, well, we're gonna double Freiermuth and let Claypool go one-on-one with our 5'9" corner. You can't let that happen. So I think Freiermuth continues to get that touchdown upside, and that's why he belongs in tier 4. Maybe that's what I meant with potential or upside with Freiermuth. Yeah. And I think it might be a little bit quarterback proof. Nobody's for sure quarterback proof, but Freiermuth might be just a little bit because of his elite potential in the red zone.
Yeah, I guess I just look at some of the names above him and think Freiermuth he'll never be a tier 1 dynasty tight end,
Right.
And
okay, go ahead.
Oh, he just feels a little capped. I think he's got some room to grow ranking wise. He could move up a couple spots. He could be a top 5 guy potentially, but he's never going to be the tight end 1 in dynasty.
The second he has like one of those huge, like Robert Tonyan-esque, like 14 touchdown seasons, I think that's when I sell Pat Freiermuth, because I think that's where all, like you mentioned, that's where all the upside comes with him. He's never going to be a heavy target guy unless all the wide receivers get injured or get traded away or something, So that's why I had him a tier below you guys. I just don't see the consistency. I mean, touchdowns are just not consistent. If he proves me wrong, that's great. But I just see him. I think we've talked about it before, and other people have talked about it. He's like Heath Miller. He's going to be a back end tight end 1 for his entire career, and that's fine. But he doesn't have that upside to be a really a huge difference maker from a season long perspective. Weekly, yeah, absolutely. Multi touchdown game upside, absolutely. But I just don't think it's coming every single weekend. When he doesn't get that touchdown, then you're going to be pretty unhappy. Which again, I guess is the same for all back half tight end ones.
Yeah, there are definitely going to be games where it's 2 catches for 28 yards and you're saying, oh no, that ruined my week. But there will be the 6 for 110 and 2 touchdown game, and he wins you a week as well. So I think that's probably why he fits so well with Dallas Goedart. Maybe his upside is second half of this season, Dallas Goedart, when he didn't have Ertz to deal with. I liked what you said there, Matt. Dallas Goedert's the end of the line for me. That's where I feel comfortable with a starting tight end. I feel the same way, but I'm willing to put Freiermuth just in there right with him. So Goedart and Freiermuth are the only 2 tight ends in tier 4. Then things get kind of squirrely. We get into some veterans that have been around the block, some guys that have been around and only had 1 or 2 nice seasons, shown a little upside, but haven't really cashed in. We ended up with 3 tier 5 consensus tight ends: Dalton Schultz, Dawson Knox, and Mike Gesicki. There's some other names that we need to talk about. Ryan, you and I both had Noah Fant in here. Matt, you had Freiermuth, as we talked about, and then Zach Ertz. But at this point, I think we can all agree, Matt, that you're really looking for a touchdown every single week. There's not going to be a whole lot of consistency moving forward.
I mostly agree with that, but I do think just because of the structure of the Cardinals offense and the lack of really anything behind DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk could be gone. Maybe they'll get Rondale Moore on board, but otherwise, Ertz had some very nice games in the second half of the season for the Cardinals, had 3 games of at least 10 targets. I think he's going to be involved with them. So just from that production standpoint, I think he's going to be more consistent than that I have ranked below him. So I'm okay with him here, despite the fact that he's old. He's probably super cheap. Nobody really wants him on their team. So as a depth piece or maybe a starter while one of your young, super talented guys are kind of working into becoming consistent starters, he's somebody I think could fill in pretty nicely for a contending team.
I guess I just don't see how you put Ertz and Gronk in it. They belong in the same tier to me.
I guess I think that's fair. I think the difference is that we know that Ertz is probably going to be playing for a little bit longer, and we're not sure if Gronk is. That's really the difference with the two for me.
I guess. I think
to be fair, Matt had Ertz in tier 5 and Gronk down in tier 7. So
I'm just not convinced he's coming back.
Not with just one difference.
I'm just not convinced he's coming back. That's all.
I'm not either, but I do agree that those two belong together. And if Gronk comes back, we can just pencil his name in as one of the 12 tight end ones.
I would like you guys or one or both of you guys to talk about Fant, because I just don't think he's very good. We've had reports ever since he come into the league that he's not really a workout guy. In practice, he doesn't give full effort. He hasn't really put it on the field. He's not going to be a top 2 target in that offense. Maybe they get a quarterback and that unlocks him. But I just don't see with him. I think Albert O is just as good, if not better than Fant in most aspects of the game.
never put it on the field. Were you watching week 17 when nobody started him and he caught the touchdown and caught like 7 for 95 yards? And everybody was, oh my gosh, he's maddening to have on a dynasty roster, Ryan. But he does have those moments where you're like, that's the guy coming out of Iowa and going to the Broncos, the seam stretching, pass catching tight end. And we just haven't seen enough of it. There's no consistency. And he just mixes in perfectly with the rest of those upside, super hype filled wide receivers in Denver that they haven't been able to put a quarterback with.
Yeah, I think I've got I've got Fant and Mike Gesicki here in the same tier, and I really think they're similar players in a lot of ways, and certainly similarly valued. I would like to see a quarterback upgrade for both of them. Gesicki is set to be a free agent, and we know we want the quarterback in Denver for Fant, for Sutton, for Judy. We'll see what happens, but yeah, this for both of these guys, it's just an upside play. Dawson Knox and Schultz also in this tier. They've already shown their upside. I think they're two of the most undervalued players in Dynasty right now, and absolutely two guys I would be targeting. And we just, we want Fant and Gesicki to get to that level where they're a little more consistent, as we saw from Knox and Schultz.
Yeah, consistent is a good word. You mentioned that they have some upside. They showed some consistency, but unfortunately with both of those guys, Schultz and Knox, they had real dud games in big moments as well. We're talking 0 catches for Dawson Knox in a playoff game when he had been so consistent for 4 or 5 weeks. And that's going to happen with all those weapons in Buffalo, especially when you have a quarterback in Josh Allen that suddenly decides he's going to run it 17 times in a game, and there's just not enough footballs to go around. So
I think that just goes back. Yeah, I think that just goes back to what you were saying at the top of the tier, that once you get out of the top 6 or 8, it's rough. It's rough. It's rough.
I do have some concerns with Schultz. I mean, it was a great season. Don't get me wrong. I didn't think it was possible based on all the weapons they have at the receiver position, and he proved me wrong there. But I do feel a little bit get similar vibes with him as we did with Robert Tonyan after his big season. I'm not sure that is going to be a repeatable thing for him. When that
I think Tonyan was so touchdown based, though.
It's true. That's true.
And Tonyan was the only option. Schultz came from behind, right? I mean, Blake Jarwin was the starter, penciled in as the starter 2 years in a row, and Schultz beat him out. Took advantage of the injury in 2020 and then flat out beat him out this year. Schultz performed when Gallup and Amari were on the field. When they were off the field, it didn't matter. And I know he was inconsistent and had the dud games, like Dan said, but I don't have those questions. The only question is, does he stay in Dallas? He's also a free agent. If he gets a big deal for the Jaguars or somebody, then I don't feel so great about him.
Yeah, 11 games with at least 5 catches. He had multi-touchdown games twice in 2021. Schultz was a guy that won you weeks and provided a lot of consistency. But as I mentioned, that game in the middle of the season, 1 catch for 4 yards, and ran all those routes and only came down with 1 grab, I think only on 1 target. That is the downside of this tier of tight end. Let's quickly get through tier 6 guys. A handful of guys that were consensus, some upside, some veterans: Hunter Henry, Cole Kmet, Logan Thomas, Evan Ingram, and Tyler Higbee. We also end up with Zach Ertz, Rob Gronkowski, and Irv Smith Jr., a guy with some upside out of this tier that we haven't seen enough of. I actually babbled with myself to consider Irv Smith Jr. in tier 5, just because there's still the unknown with him, and he's in line once again to get a lot of looks, Ryan.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I did the same thing. Considered him with Knox, Schultz, Fant, and that group. So I think that's fair. It is just a little bit more of the unknown with the injury and really just having 1 year under his belt as an NFL player. So he's certainly a guy I could see boosting up. We've got Gronk and Ertz. in this tier. Kind of already talked about them. The player that's kind of jumping out to me right now, and I know you guys, I'm pretty sure you guys are both on board, is Evan Ingram. Want him to find a new home and maybe a player we should be trying to target in dynasty leagues before free agency kicks off in March.
Yeah, just a change of scenery, a change of offensive philosophy, an opportunity to get down the field a little bit, Matt. Absolutely. Matt, what do you think about this tier and even tier 7, the guys below that?
Yeah, Ingram was a guy I was going to point out. Change of scenery, all that stuff. Also needs to stay healthy. Hasn't been the same since his rookie season. Cole Kmet, I think, is a riser with Allen Robinson gone. They have Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet, I think. So that meets my criteria there. And then Logan Thomas, I think, is probably still going to be a very consistent starter for us down the stretch. From the upside guys, I think we should talk about Brevin Jordan. I think you guys both hated him. He was my tight end 2 or 3 this season. Or in the rookie class rather. And he showed some stuff for Houston, even with terrible quarterback play. So excited to see him. Hopefully I can pick up a couple of shares of Brevin Jordan cheap this offseason.
Yeah, I think you'll be able to at this point with Brevin Jordan. And he did show a few things, got down the seam in that one play. I think it was against Tennessee. That was an exciting play and showed his like raw upside. And maybe he has something there down there. Guys, on the other episodes, I asked you if there was a player from those position groups that we're trying to buy. We got to do this really quick. I'll do mine first. At quarterback, I'm not going to say anybody other than Trey Lance. That's the guy. You got to buy him if you got a shot to. He's up there, though, in the rankings, of course. And then at tight end, I wanted to say Freiermuth, but you guys kind of talked me out of it because he is almost capped out on his upside. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. I'm going to go with Evan Ingram. Just because of the unknown about where he lands. Ryan, are there a couple guys for you?
Yeah, I think I'm ready to gamble on Deshaun Watson, check on his price. Okay. Certainly in super flex leagues and at tight end. I already mentioned Knox and Schultz as 2 guys I'll be going after.
How about you, Matt?
It's tough for me at quarterback because I want to buy Lamar Jackson since I apparently am higher than everybody else in the community. If he's quarterback 7 and I have him a quarterback 1, that seems to be my real answer was going to be Jalen Hurts, though. I just think I have less questions than most people do. And then at tight end, I agree with you on on Evan Ingram. And then I think I'm going to be trying to buy Cole Kmet as well.
Okay. Zach Ertz would be a nice one to buy if you're looking for somebody to fill in. I like what you had to say there too, as well, Matt. We mentioned that it was episode 499. Episode 500 is coming. We got something special planned for that. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then a little bit of switch to how we produce the show beyond that. 501 and beyond. Going to have a little bit of a new wrinkle here on the DLF Dynasty podcast. We're excited to bring it to you. We'll be here all year. Lots of mock drafts coming up. Lots of talk about this incoming rookie class. We're really going to flip the switch in the next couple of weeks. So stay with us. For Ryan and Matt, I'm Dan. Thanks for listening to this episode of the DLF Dynasty podcast. We'll catch you again next week.